Yo, this hot, this the spot. There it is, pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and life to stream right to you, from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a comedy podcast of creators of any variety. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it, especially if it's your first time listening. And if you're listening for the first time because you are a magnet person wanting to hear today's guest, welcome. We have tons of other magnet people who have been on the podcast. You can check those out on iTunes and SoundCloud. Lots of great non-magnet people who've been on the podcast as well. And I thoroughly enjoy listening to all of those guests give us some wisdom on how to create things and how to move forward in life. Speaking of, a girlfriend of the show, Justina, and I went to an event last night by The Skim. I don't know if you're familiar with The Skim, but they are a really great group or company. I don't know exactly the right word to call them, but they're kind of a publication. I mean, they deliver news through your email every day, but they also have some other things like podcasts. Go check them out. But they wrote a book called How to Skim Your Life, and it's all the advice they wish they had had when they were 22 years old. And I think it's really a great book for the people who are growing people. You know, if you're someone who's trying to grow, you're trying to get better, trying to learn new things, it's a great book for that. And they're on a book tour, and they had an event last night that we went to, and it was very inspiring, very helpful. And they said something in there. Someone asked the two founders of The Skim, these two women, Carly and Danielle, how they started it. And they said, well, you know, it was really terrifying to start this thing, just the two of us in our bedroom. But they stuck to it, and they did it. And it just, that inspired me and gave me encouragement, because there are lots of things that we want to do, lots of ways we want to put ourselves out there. Maybe that's improv for you, and maybe that's stand-up for you, or some form of creativity, and it's terrifying to you to do it. But listen, you can do it. Yes, it's terrifying. That's par for the course. That's not a sign that you need to cut and run or turn around and go a different direction. It's just how it goes, and you can still do it, and people do it. So just go do it yourself. I really like that advice. I hope that is helpful for you as it was helpful for me. Let's get on to today's discussion, because it's with one of my favorite improvisers and coaches, Louis Kornfeld from the Magnet Theater, and it's a really great chat. We get into a lot of stuff, so let's just get right to it. Here's my chat with Louis Kornfeld. I've wanted to have you on the podcast probably since I was doing the podcast already when I first saw you perform. And I was like, oh, that guy'd be great.
How long?
That was before I even moved up here. So that was October of 2016.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
First time I saw you perform was that show, and it was Kornfeld and Andrew's show. Mm-hmm. And I just remember thinking your first line right out the gate in that show was something along the lines of you were telling Rick's character that the reason Rick's character thought that the water was so gourmet and fancy was just because of the way the room is set, the way the restaurant was set up, and it tricks the brain. You said it much more eloquently than that, but I just remember, how is that someone's first line? Like, how did they so quickly have all of that to say? It was so, like, intellectual.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Well,
I don't remember that specific line, so I have no idea.
It was just that it felt like such a fully formed, specific character. Mm. And I just was amazed at how you were already there with your first line. Hmm. I mean, obviously that's the magic of improv. It's an illusion. From being taught by you since then, you probably didn't have a fully formed character. You were being told who the character was as time went on, but it already felt that way, which is one of the most impressive things I've seen.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're very welcome. And I think that was, I already wanted to come study here, but that really was sort of like, yeah, definitely. Definitely going to, if this is what is on this stage and this guy teaches here, then yeah, there's no reason for me to go to another school.
Oh, cool.
Even though I love the other schools.
Yeah. Oh, that's very kind of you to say. Thanks.
Oh, well, it's heartfelt. That was only the third time maybe that I saw Magnet performers.
Yeah. Where did you see elsewhere? At Alchemy?
Well, before Alchemy, it was at the NCCAF festival, and it was Rick and Chet and someone else, and was just like, wow, they're amazing.
Yeah.
And then it would have been November. It might have been, actually, that October show may have been the second time I saw Magnet performers, and then I think that is it.
Yeah, you probably saw Rick and Chet and Russ Armstrong would be my guess in that first one.
I am so familiar with the name Russ Armstrong and like his face, but I've never actually seen him perform.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's someone who always comes up, but I've never seen him.
Yeah.
But down at Alchemy and our festival in November, Chet and Rick and Branson were down.
Oh, funny.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that February at the NCCF festival, it was you and Jamie and Megan, I think. Because that was right before I moved here.
It must have been. I think it was, Jamie, Bianca, Megan, and myself, the four of us.
That was a really fun show as well. And but by that point, we were already just like gearing up to move.
Yeah.
And I already was like hell bent on Magnet.
Yeah. From those shows, from festival shows?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then I found out later that I had actually seen a commercial, that live commercial that
NBC one they did.
Right, yeah. Right. I had seen that, but just didn't connect the dots because I didn't know it was Magnet people.
Yeah.
So and technically that could have been the first time. I don't know the time frame of all this.
Yeah, very possible.
Yeah. You started improv in 2003.
Yeah.
Where at?
UCB.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Yeah.
But you managed to also perform with Second City on their cruise ship.
That was a few years later. That was I don't remember. That was like 2011, I think.
Okay.
maybe 2011, 2012. Yeah. Yes. That had been well after Magnet opened. I think Magnet had been open for like 5 years at that point.
Yeah, and you were already at Magnet, right? Didn't you?
Yeah, I've been at Magnet since they opened. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did Second City come into? Because I knew that it happened, but I didn't know when that came into the story for you.
Second City came out to New York. Beth Kliegerman, who is the talent coordinator, she came out to New York looking to cast people. So I guess the way they do it in Chicago is they have general auditions every however long, and they're kind of open auditions to eventually get placed onto touring company. But like the step below touring company would be theatricals, which is the cruise ship line.
Okay.
So I guess she just got she was just kind of like looking for new faces, was the story I heard, and she wanted to visit New York, so they did an audition out here. So I was, a bunch of us auditioned. I was very lucky to be placed in a group with Megan Gray and Des Nash and TJ Mannix. I met Rodney Morfill, who was our musical director, and we were rounded out by a guy named Greg Ott from Chicago, who's a super, super funny guy, really great improviser. So we were the first, New York cast for Second City for the cruise ship line. Wow. Yeah.
And I know from talking about this with Megan, you all did just a ton of shows.
Yeah, we did 4 shows a week. 5 shows a week, plus a murder mystery.
Oh, wow.
Luncheon.
And that was for how long?
4.5 months.
Yeah, I mean, that's just so much time. And I mean, you had been performing for 8 years by that point, or at least learning improv.
Yeah.
You're doing it for 8 years.
Yeah.
So you'd already had a lot of experience, but that has to also kick into high gear.
Yeah, it was a different experience. It took me a little bit of time to adjust to it. I think like the biggest thing was I sort of learned how to be more of an entertainer. Once I made that shift in thinking about it, a lot of the job became more fun.
Oh, cool. Because before you were thinking, how do I do good improv, and then not.
I go through phases where I get a little bit of a stick up my ass about my improv. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm like inclined to take myself too seriously.
Mm-hmm. As do I.
Yeah. So you know that's a good problem to have to work out for yourself. Yeah. So yeah, I think there was I always try to do good improv. But there was a point where like we were doing our improv shows on the cruise ship and I felt like really disconnected from the audience. There's a lot of Midwestern crowds and there's a lot of pop culture stuff that they wanted to see. And I kind of felt like every time I would step up to do something, it would just kind of like land with a thud. Like no one would laugh at anything I would do. And it took me like a little bit to kind of just reorient my thinking and realize I treat it more like entertainment, treat it more like showmanship. That piece, we used to do like Innuendo or 185, these things where you kind of like come up with a bunch of jokes on the spot.
Okay, yeah.
And our producer told us, or I guess our director, Matt Hovde, who's a really first-rate director out of Second City, he told us that the goal with those two games in particular, laughs or booze, that's what you want. Aim for laughs or booze. So I kind of realized like I'm not getting laughs. So once I started aiming for booze and I kind of leaned into like, okay, let me make some like dumb jokes. Then it became a lot more fun. The Second City job, it helped me unwind a lot. I think my improv got a little looser when I was done with that contract.
Yeah, and that's the elusive thing. I think it's tough because you want to be precious with it, but then you can be too tight with it and end up not really being open enough when you need to be.
Yeah. I would say you want to watch out for like pushing too hard to be taken seriously by people. I've caught myself there. You know, there's like a particular kind of impression I really want to make, and I'm pushing it on people. And you know that I think it comes with time. You learn to kind of like compensate for that, or let that go a little bit, or realize that it's kind of like not really in your control. And also, I don't know. I think after you've been improvising for a really long time, you just begin to maybe care a little bit less about like, are people respecting me? It's like it doesn't matter.
Right. I mean, I think for me, it's like. Not so much are people respecting me, but am I seen as good? Yeah. And like, am I being funny enough for people? And, it just gets in your head too much. Because you can never really know. Like, it just depends on who's there. It's solely subjective if they think you're funny or not. And it's just like, you're either going to land with them or not. But I feel like I'm always going to not land with them if I'm focusing too much on trying to land with them.
It's an unanswerable question.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell from the quality of the show that you're doing if people are enjoying themselves or not. And it always sucks when you're doing a show that people aren't enjoying, either because you're not on point or it's just like the wrong audience that night or whatever it is. But when you're doing a show and people are enjoying it, it's kind of a sneaky, very subtle question to start asking yourself, could I be funnier? Because then you start invoking these like imaginary world scenarios and there's no possible way to know the answer to it. And so you're measuring yourself up against this kind of impossible thing. You're always going to fall short, and then you're always going to be a little down on yourself, I think, about it. So, it's one of those questions that's like, not as helpful as it seems.
I've heard you talk about in the Magnet podcast when you interviewed Ed. You were talking about how nervous you were performing with them. And I'm paraphrasing because you may not use the word nervous.
No,
but
nervous sounds right. Yeah.
But you were saying, you were nervous to perform with them because they were so good, and you realized that all they really wanted of you, like you were focusing on being so funny and like having just the perfect joke or the perfect line or the perfect initiation, where they just want you to be intentional in your choices. And it helped you when you realized that. Was that something that came before or after the cruise?
I don't remember. It was probably slowly coming before the cruise. A few things happened. It wasn't like a lesson that I like learned hard and fast and internalized. I think a lot of it too was also growing into being sort of a member of the senior class. When you kind of feel like you're a freshman and you're being invited to perform with your icons, you feel really intimidated by it. And if you just stick around long enough, one day you realize like I'm the oldest person on the stage,
right?
And so you kind of begin to let that go a little bit. That's one of those things, and I think this is true of a lot of habits. I mean, I think habits in improv, you have to actively work on changing and developing habits. But I also think that a lot of bad habits, or let me not say not bad habits, let's say perspectives that you may bring about yourself that are maybe neutralizing perspectives, or perspectives that inhibit you, or maybe kind of pointing you in the wrong direction. So it's not a bad habit, it's just a way of looking at yourself. I think a lot of those just sort of dissolve away over time. Stick at it long enough, and you're just confronted with reality enough times that your imagined fears lose some of their grip, and you're like, okay, I don't really have to prove anything to these people anymore. Because they never wanted me to prove anything to begin with. They just wanted to play. Right. So yeah, I definitely, the Second City job, it meant a lot to me to get that job. I'm a nerd when it comes to the history of improv, and so Second City's always really loomed very large. So when I got hired for that was a big confidence booster. And I definitely think, it was like going through like a little bit of a graduation for me into like, okay, the Second City thinks I'm good enough to associate with their brand. So I guess I can leave some of my insecurities at the door now, because like that, I've proven that to myself. I wouldn't say I walked away like really confident. But I think I just dropped some of the lack of confidence, if that makes sense. It's not like I gained confidence. I dropped some of the stuff that was getting in the way of it. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine you without confidence on stage, but which is funny because that's not how I feel ever.
I mean, and I've gotten the same sort of thing where people are like, "Oh, you seem confident on there." Like, I'm in my head the entire time. But granted, the first time I saw you was 13 years into you doing improv, so of course, it was different than year 5 or 8 for you. I mean, you're in a different space, a different headspace, and you have the experience to at least focus on the things that you really want to focus on, or more of those things. And like you were saying, a lot of that stuff has fallen off. But also, just to go back to what you were saying about people inviting you to play, they just want to play. They don't want something necessarily special out of you other than what you do. I heard even a famous guitarist talk about getting asked to be on like a big name jazz musician's albums, and they were sort of like a pop star. You're like, but I'm not good at jazz, And he said he realized, well, they asked me to be on, so I'll do the thing that I do. So I don't have to be whatever is in my head about what I think they want me to be. I could just be me.
And that's always a hard one, because whenever someone invites you to participate in their show, it's always that thought of like, God, what do they expect of me? I mean, it's bad to start to think of, all right, how do I adjust to play in the style of their show? But it's equally bad to think like, no, don't do that. They want me. So who am I what's my thing, and you kind of end up bringing an impersonation of yourself to the table instead of just
being you.
Yeah, it's a real process to learn how to like let go of some of the gripping that goes on inside your own mind, to let go of like just kind of obsessing over your identity as an improviser and just kind of not caring about it too much.
Yeah,
that takes a long time.
It's hard because especially coming up here, you know, people, even if I'm intentionally trying to not get in my head too much about what my career can be here. You know, I didn't move up here saying, well, I'm going to be on SNL, because, you know, that's just, there's so many things, there's so many reasons why someone can't just necessarily just think, I'm going to move there and the biggest thing that can happen to me in my career is going to happen to me. So even without doing that, you still move up thinking this is big time, so I got to be big time good. And it just doesn't really work that way. You know, like you still have a process to go through to learn and grow and get better. Still a lot of experience that needs to happen before you get to a level that you want to be at. But, you know, at the same time, I still want to kick it in the high gear and not have to deal with some of these things. But
I imagine for some people, you thinking that way of like, okay, I'm in the big league, so I got to act like it. I imagine that, you know, that can do it for some people.
Yeah.
They have to give themselves, they have to set the bar that high so that they have to
clear it,
yeah, you know. And then there are other people who actually have to set the bar lower for themselves so that they can feel comfortable. They have to kind of get out of their way instead of reach for stuff, you know. I'm probably somewhere in the middle of that personally. It never works for me when I'm not good at like stating ambitions and then like reaching for my goals. That just never, I don't know, there's something about that always seems inauthentic to me. But at the same time, I do have certain ambitions, you know, but I have to kind of like stay out of the way of them a little bit. And I think in a way, the fact that I didn't have to move to New York, the fact that I was just here, and so I never had to like have a sense of like, how is this going to help me with my career goals or whatever. For me, this has always been just like, I just am goofing around. I'm putting off all the things I don't want to do by improvising. So I may not have even stuck with improv if I was thinking in terms of like, how's it going to help me with my comedy career?
Yeah, that's a good point.
But I mean, that's just me. But it's also a fair point too. So I take a much more casual perspective on things, and I think as a teacher, I approach it from a much more casual. I approach it from a very strong process-centric point of view. For me, like teaching improv is less about working out a person's bad habits and like reconditioning them. It's much more of like slowly eroding away the things that are not working so that the things that are working will have a clearer path. So for me, like I always think of everything in terms of the long game. But that being said, I also like killing in shows.
Right.
And I think it's important to have that spark of like, I want to not only do the best show I can do, but I want to do a really funny show. I want people to have a great time.
I found it elusive for me because I have had time, and I was talking to you about this the other day, I have had times where I did sort of aim for something, and so like this, it was like the first time I did a stage play. I said, well, you know, this is my time to shine. I'm going to do this. And because of the response that I got from several people, that's exactly what I accomplished. I'm very happy for myself, and it was a really boost in confidence. Since moving here, I haven't quite been able to do that. And I think, you know, whether I'm that type of person who can set the bar really high to clear it or not, sometimes it's just like where you are in life too, you know, like, I don't know, there's so many variables that people really just can't control.
Yeah.
And there is, I think, even if you do want to like point to your goal or point to where you're going to hit the ball, you still have to be able to roll with what happens anyway.
Definitely. There's a point where you do have to just let go of your kind of attachment to the results of your like, I think goals are good, and like taking aim and deciding this is what I want, that's a good thing, and you should define it for yourself too. You know, you don't want to spend 20 years doing this and then look back and realize, oh man, I've just been floating around and I have not expressed any agency for myself. Right. I mean, that's one thing as I'm entering what feels kind of like a new phase of improv. One thing that I'm a lot more about making choices than I used to be. I used to be a lot more about openness to the moment or whatever, and now I'm a lot more about like, no, you have to express agency in your scenes. You have to make deliberate choices and then follow through on those choices. And then the spontaneous thing is what happens when we have people who are making good, active, strong choices. What happens when those choices collide? What happens, what is it going to be, a wave interference pattern, or is it going to enhance the wave? Or that's kind of how I think about everything. Every choice just sends ripples out into the world, and then my ripples interact with your ripples, and that creates momentum for something. And ultimately in a scene, that's what the scene's about. It's what happens when our ripples are interacting with each other, and the way that those ripples come back to both of us, and how does it affect us. And I think the same thing is true in your life too. You have to make certain decisions, and you have to decide, this is the kind of show I want to do, or this is the person I want to work with, or whatever. But once you make that decision, and once you do your best to kind of steer the ship in the right way, there does come a point where you have to let go of like the results are not, that's not in my control. Right. That's not up to me. Just the best that I can do is set a clear, good intention, and be appreciative for whatever comes back in response.
Right. I mean, for me personally, I'm learning the difference between me going out and being focused and intentional and deliberate about doing what I want to achieve, and learning the difference of not doing that and how that feels versus like how the audience responds to that. Like, there are those nights where you're doing exactly what you want to do, but the audience isn't responding to it. And that feels way more satisfying to me than when I go out and I feel like I have sort of cheated myself out of performing with the integrity that I want to perform with, and then the audience is totally with it. I couldn't
agree more. People who come up to you, people who love the show, who loved what was clearly a mediocre show, that is much worse for me than walking away from a show that the audience did not seem to enjoy, but that like that was great. I mean, ideally, you want the marriage of the two of them, right? And it's possible to lie to yourself and be like, "Fuck them, that was a brilliant show." But I'm not talking about those where you didn't create an entertaining experience. I'm talking about the kind of show where that you did something that you haven't done before. You did something that was a little bit more honest, or a little bit more, you tapped into some kind of emotional reserve you'd never touched on before, or you played from a point of view you'd never played before, or you just, I don't know, something happened where it was like, wow, this was a unique experience. There's something special about this, and this audience just kind of didn't appreciate it for what it was. Right. They had different expectations, and so they didn't follow it. That's different than a show where it's like, anything I do is good, and if the audience doesn't like it, they're a bad audience.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not the same thing. Right. But those are definitely, in a way, you kind of, I love those shows. They stand out to me because that they were, they're precious. Those are the ones that don't happen very often.
Yeah. I mean, even if the audience isn't into it, it does feel sort of good. It almost helps if I know I'm doing a good job and doing good improv, and the audience isn't responding, because then I don't get distracted by how the audience is going to respond. Yeah. And I'm just like, in it
Yeah.
and focused on what I'm trying to do on stage.
Yeah.
Whereas if the audience is really responding to things, then I might start leaning into that in a way that would make me go the direction I don't want to go.
Which I think can be a good thing. It's all a question of where the leaning in is coming from.
Right.
Because you want to follow, the audience is your partner the same way that your partner is your partner.
Yeah, and I'm there to entertain them. I want them to have a good time.
Yeah.
So when I do get a good response to them, I don't want to ignore them either.
I think, we want to surprise ourselves when we're improvising. We want to lean into certain things that never occurred to us before and surprise ourselves with how we're able to justify the lean in, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are times where you'll have a great idea for a scene, but the audience starts laughing at something that you didn't expect, and you're like, oh, okay. I'll just do more of that, and you surprise yourself, and it's a great experience. And you have one of those shows where it's like, wow, I really was improvising. I couldn't have done it without their response. They told me something I didn't know, and by just embracing it, I found something way cooler than I thought. Mm-hmm. That's like the most fun, because then you know that you're playing with the audience as much as you're playing with your scene partner.
Yeah,
it's those nights where the audience starts laughing at something and you lean into it because you're insecure,
right?
And because you feel like, oh, my job is to please these people, so I have to give them what they want.
Right.
So
that feels like a hacky.
Okay. I think it can be very hacky. I think a lot of times it just comes from not trusting yourself, or feeling like the job is purely to entertain, where you're like a server and you just have to kind of serve them what they're asking for.
Right.
The ideal place is the audience points you towards something that you didn't realize. And when you notice it, you're inspired by it, and then you're all part of this one great thing.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, you feel kind of cheap when you sort of sell out your own intentions, and you catch yourself just wanting to be liked more than wanting to do a good scene.
Yeah. I think one of the things for me too, and this is just because I'm still growing in this regard, but I feel like I don't always have all my mental faculties or something, and some of that is just like comedy brain needs to grow. But even for what I do understand about how comedy works and how it can work and moves that one can make, I feel like they're not coming to me when I'm on stage. It's like there's some sort of writer's block that's happening when I'm up there, and that affects how I can be intentional in a scene. And it's also, there's this dichotomy of, you can try too hard to be intentional. I feel like times when I've been performing in what felt like an intentional way, or a character who at least had an intent in the scene or in their world, in their universe, those are the times when I'm most free and not thinking about it so much. Yeah. But it seems counterintuitive because, intentional, it seems like I would have to be intentionally doing something. Let me intentionally do this move or this kind of thing, or thread this needle that way. But it just doesn't really work that way.
Well, it's possible to be looking so hard for your intention that you miss the obvious thing that's right there. You can be overvigilant for it. Because sometimes the intention is kind of so obvious that you're like, that couldn't possibly be it.
Overthinking it. It's like, when people are learning algebra or something, and this is an easy equation, but you're thinking it has to be a much more difficult problem to solve, so you're trying to use the wrong equation to solve it.
I did a show with Rick one time where we were in a prison, and it was one of my favorite shows, and it was just like I was visiting him for an hour in prison at like a table, like one of those open areas where you could sit with an inmate. And I realized my whole character, we were talking for like 10 minutes, having a conversation about something. And at the end of it, it was a lengthy pause. And then I was like, all right, what else can I tell you? And I realized in that one phrase, that's it. That's my purpose here. It's that simple. I'm just trying to keep the conversation going because, and then after the fact, it occurred to me of like, oh, he gets like once every 2 weeks or something, he gets a visit, and the rest of his time he's just in prison having to like think about his life. So I'm trying to keep his mind off that for an hour and be a good brother to him. I was his brother in the scene. That's all I'm doing. There's just that one line of dialogue, and then the whole rest of the show is like, I don't have to think about that at all. I don't have to think about anything. I know my purpose, and that's it. It's really, really straightforward and really like obvious. And in a way, like from my perspective, it was like the most obvious intention within that situation, but that doesn't make it a bad one. There are times where you go into a show where you're so like, you've preset yourself on like, I'm going to play with intention.
Right.
I'm going to have strong wants, that you end up overshooting and you spend the whole show looking for it instead of just embracing what you find and going with it.
Right.
You know, you can search too hard.
Yeah.
And those feel like shit because you never got to anything in the show, and then you're like, I set the wrong intention for myself for the show.
Right. That's been my experience this season. Has just been exactly that, of just, I want to do this, and then I go up there and I don't have an opportunity to do that. And then I miss all the things that I should,
You gotta like tend to your state of mind, I find, before a show, because like generally speaking, your state of mind at any given time is going to kind of either be restless and searching, energetic, restless, and kind of like anxious to like do stuff, or you're going to be kind of like sluggish and slow and inert. You're going to be kind of reluctant to make choices, and it's going to take a lot to get you to do anything. You just feel like words aren't coming to you really well. You're not accessing ideas really well. You want to just kind of do what feels comfortable, or you're in a kind of a clear state of mind, which is like neither energetic nor inert. You're just kind of like open and present, and you haven't really made a decision. You're just kind of like, okay, I'm okay is the best word I can think of.
Yeah.
And I think you want to get to that state of mind.
Right. Because then you're really noticing everything and able to process what it maybe means in a way that's like, doesn't make you try to microscopically find the game.
Exactly.
Find what the importance of this is.
Exactly. And I think that the moment you recognize the meaning of something is simultaneous. Recognizing it is exactly the same thing as taking action on it. The moment it clicks in your mind, oh, that's what this means, is the moment you find, I've already made a choice about what to do about it, and now I'm great. It's possible to like force yourself. You're feeling sluggish and so you try to force yourself to be like, really, I'm going to be really intentional tonight. And then you end up superimposing an intention in a scene where it doesn't quite belong, because you're not really watching the scene that you're in. You're watching your own state of mind, and you're trying to push through to another better place. And that's not great. Or you're just in a really active, let's go people state of mind that night. And you're too quick to judge everything and label everything, and you're either like putting out fires that are taking place, or you're starting unnecessary fires on stage. You're just in a rush to get to the juice, and that's not great either, because that's also, you're not evaluating the scene that you're in honestly. You know what I mean? Like, you're evaluating it in terms of how you feel. This isn't fast enough for me right now. So I think you do want to approach the show, because you don't know. There are certain things that are in your control, and there are certain things that you can pre-plan for a show, and I think you should pre-plan for a show. If you're doing a megawatt show, you're going to approach that from a very specific way. This show is going to be a little bit more about, I want laughs in this show, so I'm not really going to do like deep, heavy-duty character work in this one. Depending on the form that you're doing, this is either going to be a very idea-heavy piece, or it's going to be a piece that's going to involve character work, or it's going to be kind of a more fluid, organic piece. Or if we're doing a mono scene with 4 people, this is one where I'm going to get to pace myself a little bit. And I think that before the show, you should kind of adjust your thinking. Set your intention to just kind of visualize what kind of show it's probably going to be, and then forget about it. But
that's for like mindset before someone's doing a house team show,
or anything. You just want to kind of visualize like, okay, what's the experience of this show meant to be like for the audience?
So if
this is a show that's going to be this is going to require a lot of broad, silly energy. This is going to be kind of a sloppy, goofy show. I want to think about that beforehand, and I want to maybe get myself into a state of mind where I'm accessing that kind of energy so I have it available to me. I might sing silly songs in the shower, you know, the morning before the show or something, just to kind of prime the pump.
Oh, interesting.
Or if it's something that's like a little bit slower, I might go set myself in the state of mind of like, I'm going to go out and people watch for a little bit this afternoon. I'm just going to kind of watch what people are doing when they are just kind of not trying to perform for anybody.
Right.
I'll go sit in a coffee shop and watch people at the table and just kind of notice them, just to put myself in like a very observant state of mind. I think those are things that you can't control how the show is going to go, but you can control the state of mind that you bring to the top of the show, and you should.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but that is such an eye-opening point, because lately when I've had shows where I wasn't crazy about it was because I hadn't done anything like that. I had brought a different energy to it because of whatever is going on in my day, or however I try to prepare for it. I just wasn't putting myself in the right frame of mind. That's really good advice. I think some of this, what you were saying a minute or so ago, is also an allegory for just doing improv, because in a scene, you can have the wrong frame of mind, or be focusing on the wrong thing, and not allowing what's happening in the moment to really affect you. That's kind of just like learning stuff in general too. I mean, if someone is thinking, I want to be in this place in my comedy career and I'm not, they're kind of missing the things that they could be learning from.
Yeah, your attitude is the thing that ultimately makes the difference. You know, you should be making active choices to pursue your goals. You should also recognize that the results you get from your choices are not up to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, you're either going to get exactly what you want, you're going to get more than what you wanted, you're going to get less than what you wanted, or you're going to get something totally different from what you wanted. Those are you can bank on at least one of those outcomes happening. And none of them are in your control.
Right.
But you're in control of your attitude about how you respond to those outcomes. And, you know, if you've already set your mind to be disappointed and angry or pissed off or distracted,
right,
then you're going to respond in a way that maybe isn't to your benefit, certainly not to the benefit of your peace of mind.
Right.
You know, you're going to be angry at yourself, or you're going to be angry at other people, or you're going to get depressed and feel dispirited, or you're going to put the blame on some other thing, or whatever. But you know, that's how people develop bad attitudes, and that's how those bad attitudes end up poisoning their own experience of everything.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot to that. Control the things that you can control. You can control the choices that you can make going into something, and you can control your attitude,
right,
as you're met with the results that you're met with.
I think that's a really necessary point for some people, because it's gotten to be such a big deal, the 10,000 hours mindset of if you practice something for 10,000 hours, you'll become a master. And of course, that's like, if you do anything for a certain amount of time, it's gonna feel more lived in when you do that skill. Like, obviously, what people overlook when they talk about that stuff is this truth that there's some elements you cannot control. You can practice something you can practice playing guitar for 10,000 hours. You're not necessarily going to be on the level that you think you're going to be at the beginning of that 10,000 hours.
And I don't like the whole idea of I'll be a master at this, because
I kind of hate it too.
To me, that's ego. You know, that is, I'm projecting this version of myself who is going to be impermeable. Right. I'll never make a mistake again. I will always have the right answer.
This is not how art works.
It's not how anything works.
Right.
I think that's a very dangerous state of mind to be in, actually, because you start to kind of withdraw yourself from reality. And if you think about it, in improv at least, it's the exact opposite of what we want. Right. In improv, you know, we want to be surprised by our own intelligence. And we want to be surprised at the way that we cope with the unexpected, and surprise ourselves with how coping with the unexpected leads us to make choices that wouldn't have occurred to us, and kind of blow our own minds, or,
Right.
or we're blown away by how good our team is or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what you want. Masters never accomplish that because they're never surprised by anything because they know how to do everything.
Right.
So I think that's the wrong way to think about stuff. That's a consolation fantasy that helps you to feel less vulnerable. But I think that there are other better ways to reframe your vulnerability so vulnerability doesn't feel like a weakness. It feels like a pulse. It feels like a kind of electrical undercurrent that lets you know that you're alive and adaptable.
Right. And that's such a needed thing in improv. And I would say art performance in general, you want to be able to be affected by things.
Yeah.
And if you're not, then you're disconnected in a way that's just not going to be great for the product you're trying to make, or the piece you're trying to work on.
I think, you can end up sealing yourself off, and now I'm a master at something, so now I'm just gonna deliver what I do,
right?
And you end up presenting last night's discoveries to people, or last week's discoveries to people, or this was a discovery I made 10 years ago when I achieved mastery. Here it is again. You don't end up presenting today's discoveries to people, or in the best of all possible worlds, you don't end up being there to allow people to watch you make a new discovery on one of those exciting nights where things don't go in according to plan.
You're right.
I think if your mind is already made up that like I'm a wizard at this, I think on a certain level you delude yourself, and you kind of you probably deny yourself that possibility of growing,
or even like just managing the expectation of thinking that you're on the road to mastery or becoming a wizard, just because this is not going to necessarily go like that. I mean, just like you were saying about again the allegory of this, like in a scene, you want to be able to be vulnerable, but in your process of learning, you want to be able to be vulnerable. You also want to realize just like the reality is stages of learning are just different. Like if you're learning an instrument, at the beginning stage, you have really big strides in improvement, but you hit a plateau with that at some point where the strides of improvement are not that great. And you can that can easily trick a person, if they don't manage their expectation, into thinking that they're not really getting better, or that it's boring for them now, or something.
That's where people give up.
Exactly. And that's a thing that's just a reality that you just have to accept.
Yeah.
And if people are thinking like, well, if I'm getting these 10,000 hours and I'm going to be so great, then this shouldn't be like that. Well, no, that's exactly how it should be.
Yeah,
that's how it is.
Because you're assuming a level of control that's not real. You're assuming that you can control the outcome. If I work hard enough, the outcome of this will be exactly what I want it to be.
Right.
And again, that's not reality.
That's
so you're setting yourself up for misery because reality doesn't do the things you want it to do. We're a guest here. You know what I mean? Reality is not it's not our pet.
Yeah.
We are its special guest, but it's going to treat us the way it wants to treat us.
Yeah.
How we deal with it, that we can control. But what it does, I can practice 10,000 hours and then find out I practiced the wrong thing for 10,000 hours.
Oh, gosh. I mean, I use the example of Shaquille O'Neal when he was playing basketball and everyone dogged him for how bad of a free throw shooter he was. When he was at the Lakers, Phil Jackson said, it's not that he's not practicing, because people keep telling him he needs to practice. He's practicing. He's just practicing a bad form.
Right.
And so that's why he's like...
Right. So now he's the master of this bad form. Or
right.
Whatever.
This thing is going to make him miss all of his free throw shots.
Yeah. The whole 10,000 hour thing, to me, I'm like very distrustful of like corporate talk stuff.
Yeah. And I think Malcolm Gladwell has gotten upset with the way people have taken that.
I'm sure, because it's the same way that people take like corporate improv lessons and turn it into just like a way to enhance, profitability and productivity, which in and of themselves aren't bad things, but again, there's like a little bit of like an unrealistic sense that you have magical control over fate, and you don't. For me, the 10,000 hour thing always gets misread as like I will achieve some kind of perfection.
Yeah.
Whereas, no, I think what happens in 10,000 hours is you dissolve away and you realize that practice is the only thing that there is. I'm not practicing to get any better. I'm practicing because that's how I stay excellent. Mm-hmm. I think a big issue too is like a lot of people have internalized this idea that it exists in a binary. It's either mastery or incompetence, or mastery and I'm not good enough to call myself anything. So if I'm not a master, I constantly find myself apologizing for my own ineptitude. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very easy to project this like great fantasy of what mastery is. Mastery is when I no longer feel the need to apologize for myself. Mm-hmm. But there's an easy fix for that without having to be a master, and that's learn to stop apologizing for yourself. Maybe you're apologizing for something that doesn't require apology.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a difference between I'm a master versus I just practice excellence. Mm-hmm. To the best of my abilities, I try to practice doing things as excellently as I can, given the context of the specific scene, the specific show, the specific mm-hmm. partnership, the specific night. Mm-hmm. I may not hit it all the time, and that's okay, but that's my practice. My practice is to just be as excellent as I can at all times. Right. And you know what? There's going to be flaws to it, and some of those are going to end up being far more interesting flaws than not, and some of them are going to be not interesting flaws, but why should I apologize to anybody for those flaws? At the end of the day, those flaws are the things that end up making me an interesting person and end up keeping improv interesting to me. Yeah. So it's like, well, why do I want to apologize for that? Because I'm not Jason Mantzoukas? Right.
I mean, I have to check myself at that all the time too, where I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not as good as Ben Schwartz. It's like, yeah, but he's a different person.
He's a different person.
And he's going to do stuff different than I'm going to do it. And, if I don't have the makeup, then I'm not going to fire the way he is. Yeah. I got to find the way I can fire. I mean, it's another example I use in talking about 10,000 hours is like Stevie Ray Vaughan. He died in like 1990, and his brother, who people will say is a great guitarist, but they also will not say he's as good as Stevie Ray Vaughan, has gotten way more than 10,000 hours in. Mm-hmm. And people say, well, it's got to be focused practice. I think when you're playing with Eric Clapton at Crossroads Festival, that's pretty focused. The dude's really good, and he's really good in a subtle way, Jimmy Vaughan, but mm-hmm. he's not Stevie Ray Vaughan. Mm-hmm. Despite the fact that one has way more hours on stage than the other. So what accommodates for that? It's just that it's not about the hours that they put in. It's about just who the person is and how they're special. Yeah. And Jimmy Vaughan has a lot to be respected for, because he's just got this special thing that is who he is as a guitarist.
I bet he's going to live his life in misery if his dominating thought is I'm not Stevie Ray Vaughan. Yeah. This is obviously easier said than done, because I think partly it's the way our brains are hardwired, and partly mm-hmm. it's the way that our culture programs us and reinforces the hardwiring of our brain.
You have to be the biggest thing in order to matter.
Yeah. And I think that there's an unrealistic sense of just how in control of things we really are. How things happen because I want them to happen this way, and I made it happen this way. We have very limited control over things.
Oh, yeah.
If anything, and this is the part that's a lot easier to say than to do, but be the best Jimmy Vaughan that you can be, mm-hmm. and practice having gratitude that you live in the kind of reality that also produces a Stevie Ray Vaughan. Yeah. In a way, there's a certain thing of no matter how much I practice, I'm never going to be as funny as Jason Mantzoukas. I can resent that and be angry at myself or angry at Jason Mantzoukas. Right. Or I can kind of have this thing of like, you know what? I think I'm good. Every time I see Jason Mantzoukas, I'm like, damn, man. That can make me really upset, or it can make me appreciate that this is the reality I find myself in. And in a weird way, it's like it's its own gift. As long as I don't mm-hmm. associate like I'm the problem here. Right. I'm as good as I am. I'm doing my own thing. There exist people who are better than me, whether because of practice or sheer talent or other circumstances. Why is that a problem? Why should I care about that? Yeah. Why should that disrupt my happiness with what I'm doing or how I get to spend my time?
There's so many people who have they were doing anything, piano playing, comedy, guitar, or whatever, and they saw someone who was just like a master, someone who was just like so good, and they thought, well, I'll never be able to do that, so they quit. And who's to say that you still wouldn't have done something really special and great that people could appreciate, that you could get something out of? I mean, I know for a fact from hearing Stephen Colbert talk about Conan, he really admires Conan, and he went a long time until like recently thinking he just wasn't up to par for Conan. Like he went through Daily Show and Colbert Report and getting Late Show thinking like, yeah, I could never get Conan to hire me because he kept sitting in packets to late night with Conan O'Brien.
Which is interesting, because not to downplay Conan, but if you think of like early 90s Conan, he tapped into something for the early 90s that was kind of like iconic in that era. But Conan's not exactly the most relevant comedian in our times, and Colbert serves that role in a way that Conan doesn't, and that's not to take away from Conan,
right? Because Conan's doing his own amazing thing.
I mean, if you go back, my apologies, trigger warning for anybody listening, but I'm gonna get dark for a second. If you go back 12 years, and Louis C.K. is at the top of his game, and you're like, I'm a comedian, but I'll never be as good as Louis C.K. Well, who knows that you don't have something in you that just hasn't matured yet, and when it matures in 2019, and you're like, oh wow, my comic point of view is way more relevant and meaningful now. What I had to say in 2012 seemed to be kind of mediocre, but in 2019 I'm on the point. Right. And where is he? He's a disgrace.
Exactly, yeah.
You just don't know, you know what I mean? So you may not be great at something right now, but that might also mean
later, yeah.
Exactly. Or that something that to you seems really obvious won't end up being a really meaningful point of view when other people are ready to hear it. You just don't know. Right. None of this stuff is in your control. So like disentangling your ego from that. Yeah. Removing yourself from attachment to the outcome of everything, and removing a sense of evaluating yourself based on the outcome of everything. I mean, I think like that's your life's work, only because it's going to, that's the stuff that gets you to quit when I don't want to quit. My frustrations want me to quit. Right. But you're always going to have frustrations. Right. You know what I mean? If you want to quit, but don't confuse yourself with your frustrations.
Exactly. Yeah. How has meditation affected your improv? Or is that something that came so much later than doing improv for you?
Probably came so much later.
Because you're a very centered guy. How long have you been doing meditate? How long have you been meditating?
Probably a couple of years, but I didn't really get serious until I went to India and actually
that was recent. It was in the last year.
It was in November.
Right.
So I actually learned from someone who actually is a good teacher and knows what he's doing. But yeah, I mean that's a part of my life. It's something I practice.
I would have thought it's something that you've been doing for almost as long as you've been improvising.
No.
So your vibe is just naturally very calming.
I guess so. I don't feel calm, but everyone tells me that that's what I do to a room, so I guess so.
It's a good thing.
I would guess that my temperament has inclined me towards meditation instead of meditation informing my temperament.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, the improv and meditation both have presence as a major thing. They both have taking in the picture that you're in, including your thoughts about the picture that you're in, and just kind of accepting that reality alone is good enough. I think the big difference is like meditation is about seeing what's here right now, and improv is about seeing what's here right now and then making an imaginative leap off of that, superimposing something else that could perfectly fit what's here and now, so that you make a show out of it, you make a play out of it. So I mean, they have that in common, but yeah, I don't know. I couldn't really say how it affects my improv. Probably not too much.
Right.
I've gone through definitely first couple of years after I saw TJ and Dave, I would try to use my show like a meditation, and it was just a disaster. everything would be so thoughtful and patient and so present, but like that fake kind of presence.
Right, I know what you mean, yeah.
I'm just like so aware of how present I am right now.
I'm going to be like TJ and Dave.
You can't.
You can't.
Interestingly, the only way you can be like TJ and Dave is to be nothing at all like TJ and Dave.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of those like fun contradictory catch-22s that takes a little bit of experience to kind of learn the hard way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it like just like it's possible to try too hard to meditate. I think trying too hard to meditate is identical to trying too hard to improvise or to have intention in your improv, or to have an epiphany. Like try to have an epiphany.
Yeah.
The goal is to make discoveries when you're improvising. Surprise yourself. Try.
Yeah. Yeah, it's impossible.
It's impossible. So you just kind of are ready for it. I mean, what I think meditation is an excellent way to monitor your state of mind and to learn how to adjust it so you get to that clear state of mind that you want.
Right.
Because ultimately that clear state of mind is where you make intelligent, informed choices based on what's actually happening and not what you hope will happen or what you're afraid is going to happen. When you're feeling very like sluggish, you're filled with fear about unexpected outcomes, so you don't want to do anything at all. When you're feeling very fiery, you want things to go a certain way and you're going to push them to go that way, and so you make choices not based on what's going on in the room. You make choices based on what you have determined should be happening, and neither of those are states of mind that are conducive to the smartest choices you can make. So I think meditation is good about like learning how your own nervous system operates and learning how to make that state shift. And I think that applies to improv, just in being more observant of yourself and recognizing I'm either in a very fearful, tight place, or I'm in a very kind of agitated place, and what can I do to kind of acknowledge it but pull back enough so I get to a clarity again.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, but there are opportunities to practice it and get better at it, and it's always giving yourself a break when it doesn't happen. Because there's so many times when I try to meditate and my mind drifts, and the app I use have said, like, if your mind drifts, that's fine. But it's so easy to be like, I'm bad at this because my mind drifts. Or like same with improv, like I'm bad at improv because I'm not really listening on the sidelines. Like, take it easy.
Yeah.
Just like recenter on your breath, recenter on the scene. You're fine.
There's that ego again, though, because like it's the nature of your mind to drift. That's what your mind does. Yeah. Your mind is just constantly scanning and assimilating and like re-assimilating information. Your mind goes all over the place, and it doesn't think in a straight line. It thinks kind of fractally, you know. So what's the problem? I set a goal for myself to not let my mind drift. My mind did exactly what it did. That's like setting a goal for myself to not let my stomach digest. It's like, it's what it does. That's its nature. So then you just kind of watch it of like, okay, how often does my goal not work out? And you learn a little bit of your relationship between your mind and your ego or whatever. But that's your ego kicking in again of like, I'm a failure. I set out to do this thing and I couldn't do it. I'm a failure. Well, it's because you're trying to do something that's impossible. That is a failure, but you're not a failure. You attempted an impossible thing. So now you learn something from that. How do I reframe my goals so that I'm attempting something possible? That ego, man. The funny thing too is like, you know, you talk in this way where it's like your ego is a problem, but your ego is really not a problem. It's just like we just wrongly assume that we have more control over things that we do.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think when it comes to like improv, your ego is a huge help. I mean, I'm constantly coaching. You know this. I'm constantly pushing of like, tap into your ego, have an ego, be vain, be selfish, be greedy, because it's funny. And you realize when your ego isn't occupying itself by calling you the world's biggest piece of shit, and you actually give it something better to occupy itself with, your ego does hilarious things. You know what I mean? I would say 90% of all comedy is just watching people's egos go out of control.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's just trying to manage that off stage.
Yeah.
That's really what the work is.
Yeah, which I think is learning where to let go of attachment to the outcome of things.
That's why politeness doesn't work on stage.
Yeah.
You know, because you're holding back so much. You know, like, oh, I don't want to say that. That might be impolite. You know, they might take that the wrong way, or someone might not like this joke that I made. You know, you kind of have to let go of a lot of things. Like, obviously, you don't want to be like a bigot. So, like, but aside from that, like, you don't really have to hold back being a bigot. You just don't do it. It's pretty easy. But it's the other stuff of like, I don't want to step on their line. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to edit the scene too soon. You know, it's that sort of stuff where it's like, being impolite is not going to help you.
No, and you definitely...
I said that wrong. Being polite is not going to help you.
It can, but if you're a naturally polite person, then your work is going to be to learn how to be a little less polite.
Right.
If you're a naturally impolite person, then your work is going to...
You might have to be a little more polite.
You're going to have to learn how to show a little more respect to people.
Right.
You know, I'm also big on, like, you should be considerate when you're improvising.
Absolutely.
Improv is not just, let's be totally spontaneous. There's no such thing. Improv is, let's have a spontaneous moment together. Let me spontaneously see your intelligence shine through. So, like, you know, one half of that equation is like you yes and things so that you step into situations that you wouldn't normally step into, or you go along with ideas that you would normally resist, just to see what happens when you're outside the familiar, when you're outside just pure habits, right? Yes and is a wonderful and instructive tool to teach a person how to break out of simply being habitual all the time. But yes and is only one half of the scale. The other half is your taste, your judgment, your intelligence, your selectiveness. I'm not going to make this joke. I'm not going to say this thing.
Right.
I'm not going to do this thing. And that's where people get to see you.
Right.
If you suddenly suspend all of your sense of tastefulness because yes and,
right,
they're not really going to see you. They're going to see you attempting to be a good improviser.
Right.
If they see nothing but I'm being very considerate, but I'm not going along with anything, nothing's really going to happen.
Right.
So part of your job is to find that balance of, how do I say yes to things that this doesn't feel right to say yes to? Let's see what happens. What happens when I go through this door? But do it in a way where I know I'm also not deliberately going down a path where, like, this is going to really upset people. And, you know, and that balance, that's where you show your integrity as a person. That's where you show your character as a person, you, yourself. You know, I that's an idea that I think doesn't get talked about enough in improv or outside of improv. We're responsible for our own character, our own integrity. And that comes down to our choices and our attitude. Do we have a good attitude? Do we make informed, smart, considerate choices? Or do we have a bad attitude or whatever? But, you know, our life's work is to develop our own character and to make sure we have integrity, you know, to make sure that when we die, people have something good to say about us. And we practice that when we're improvising. We practice making choices on the fly in front of people in situations where we don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Right.
We should be making considerate, thoughtful, kind-hearted choices, which is not the same thing as I'm not going to step on your toes or edit you.
Right.
That's a thing of like, no, within the context, we're in an agreement when we're playing the show. We are in an agreement to create trouble for each other.
Right.
That's our job, is to find interesting opportunities to create trouble. And so that means I do have to find that part of me that desperately wants to interrupt you, and desperately wants to, you know what I mean? Like, and that's actually being a very considerate improviser.
Right, and you're not inconsiderate to edit because that's part of the rules that everyone agreed to.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm not stepping outside of the lines by editing a scene.
Yeah.
It's maybe how I do it that can be rude, but you know, I'm not trying to do that, so I know I'm going to avoid it.
I think you're inconsiderate to not edit a scene.
Yeah.
Because if it's a good scene, you will find a way to come back to it. And if it's a bad scene, you will be very happy it's been edited.
Yeah.
You know, it's letting scenes go on so long that they just lose their fizz.
Yeah. You're making it harder for them.
And that's a case where your considerateness is actually a very selfish considerateness, because now it's becoming, look how considerate I am, rather than I'm just going to help this show.
I don't want to do something to them. Yeah, it's not about the show.
It becomes a little bit of a neurotic politeness to other people, where it becomes more about the fact that you're polite than whether your behavior is genuinely the polite, respectful thing to do.
Right.
And that, I mean, you know, unfortunately, the only way to learn how to edit well is to edit badly a few times.
Yeah.
And you got to develop the rhythm for it. And not only, I mean, there's comedy rhythm, and there's also, you got to be able to read the room and have a sense of how much more do these people have in them. Can the scene go on another 5 minutes, or are they done? And part of that is like playing with people for long enough that you just kind of begin to read their body language. Part of it is just a little bit more of an intuitive thing where you just kind of feel like, oh, there's more potential in this scene, and I trust these improvisers enough to do it. And that, you know, you hone that skill, but you should be editing. Everyone should be editing.
Well, this is a good time to edit the discussion portion and go into the end of the episode where we create something together.
Great.
But given what we've talked about, I don't know what's jumping out as for me, something specific to sort of demonstrate to the audience.
Yeah.
Because we were talking a lot about, what if we were talking so much about being open and free. Is there a way to demonstrate what we mean when we talk about that in an improv scene?
Openness, yeah. I think openness in scenes is what happens between the lines of dialogue. And so, like an exercise that I like to do in class sometimes is just, excuse me, have people do scenes where you say something very normal and just wait a couple of seconds to respond. But in the couple of seconds, what are you doing while you're waiting to respond? You're not just pausing. You're using those couple of seconds to see what the other person's talking about. Just get an image of it in your head and then respond to them. Yeah. It's not helping. Whoever you're honking at is well aware that it doesn't work. But you feel like you're doing something. You feel like you're contributing something that's gonna, it's just, you know.
It's always funny too when it's like the second horn is this dinky little.
Yes.
It's like you get the loud one.
Yes.
And then the other one's like, eh.
I like to think that it's a person who's been encouraged by the loud one. They're like the little like toady second car who's just kind of like, yeah. You said it, boss. You know. Just on a side thing, I went to India for a little bit with Megan, and India is the noisiest place I've ever experienced. The car horns. I mean, people use car horns just like to communicate. They just honk constantly about everything. Yeah. They will honk just to let you know, hey, I'm driving next to you right now. So when I got back to New York, I was like, I can't believe how quiet and relaxed it is here. My first week back in New York was like, holy shit, this place is so gentle.
I keep hearing that about like a lot of different areas overseas.
Yeah.
Like how loud people are and
yeah.
how quick they are to even get out of a car and have a conversation about whatever.
No joke, you don't realize how relaxing this is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even here in the middle of Koreatown, it's like, nah, man, this is nothing.
Nothing, yeah.
So openness.
And the exercise was that pause.
Yeah. And you know, it's not just that you don't like say, give me like an ordinary line of dialogue.
I went to the doctor earlier and he told me everything's good.
It's not that, you know, it's not, line. No, it's a great line, but that was like a demonstration of like a bad pause. I'm just like staring you down and all I'm doing in that staring down is waiting my turn or trying to think of things to say. And that to me isn't really openness.
Okay.
Openness is creating a space around your line of dialogue, but it's not just waiting my turn, nor is it thinking of things to say. It's really just taking a second to like visualize what you're saying and then let my response be a very spontaneous thing.
Okay.
You know, so this is not going to be funny or good improv, but give me that same line of dialogue again.
Okay. I went to the doctor today and he said everything is going to be okay.
That's a huge relief. So it's a really like obvious response and not really a funny thing. But what it does is by just being like a little bit open to what you said and not too quick to respond to it, but also not taking those like painfully long, let me think of a really great response.
Right, exactly.
I start to
really absorb it more?
Yeah, I start, yes.
Because the first time you were way more stiff.
Yes.
And it didn't look like you were paying attention, or it looked like you didn't like it.
It's like I'm wearing one of those raincoats where like your line of dialogue just beads on the surface, but it never goes anywhere.
And the second time it seemed like you actually absorbed it.
That's it, yeah.
And just like going by body language alone.
Yeah, that's openness to me. Openness is like, it's like watering a houseplant, or it's like it can permeate the soil. Openness is just letting it get in you, and then you don't know what you're going to do in response, but you let it get in you first, and then when you're responding from a more connected place. Right. Whereas if I'm the raincoat thing, my response is like independent of you. Right. I'm responding to what I think will be a funny or correct response instead of just responding to you.
Exactly.
I don't know how to build that into anything, but that's my sense on openness.
But I really appreciate it. It was even something I thought about once when a stranger passed me on the street and said, "Hey," and I said something like, "Oh, okay," like it's okay, or something like that wasn't a proper response. It was like as if they had said to me, "How are you?"
Yeah.
Or "How's your day?"
Yeah.
And I responded to that question that they didn't actually say.
Yeah.
And I realized instantly, it happens a lot on the improv stage too, where someone says something and you get the general gist of what's happening in that moment. It's like, this person is just speaking to me. So what's just like the thing you say in response to that? And I didn't absorb at all what they actually said. I didn't give myself a pause to think, oh, they said hello. Oh, hello. I didn't do that at all. And that happens all the time in improv, where people aren't really absorbing what the person said. They're just thinking, well, then this is a doctor-patient relationship, and we're in this location, so this must be the kind of response that I should have. And they never really absorbed anything and let it affect them. And they didn't even consciously become aware of what was even said or happened. All the things that happen.
Yeah, people will oftentimes play improv scenes like they're playing ping pong. It's just like hitting an idea back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's like your idea never lands on me and actually like permeates me. I swat it back to you immediately because I have to yes and. Honestly, I think a lot of that is we misteach yes and. To be honest, I think a lot of people interpret yes and as I have to say yes and then to every line of dialogue that comes my way. And so they get used to thinking about, and if I don't say it immediately, I am failing my partner or failing my scene, or my teacher is going to stop me and call me out. So I have to immediately say yes and to you. And so the scene has that thing where it's like I'm hearing the words, but I'm not understanding the words.
Right.
I'm responding to the words, but I'm not responding to the person saying those words. So that, to me, like openness is like bring as much attention to the in-between moments as you bring to the moments. Right. And recognize that the in-between moments are where the moments come from. The lines of dialogue only come out of the not lines of dialogue. So if you're not bringing attention to the not lines of dialogue, your dialogue is going to be coming from a suspect place. Yeah. Your dialogue is going to be coming from your needs as an improviser rather than your character's intentions. And, depending on the kind of show you're in, if I'm doing a show with Rick, I'm not really going to engineer too much. I'm going to take it very simply and be very open.
But you're doing a two-person show that's lasting an hour.
Lasts an hour. Right. So I know we have a lot of time to let it kind of reveal itself to us. I mean, we will know more or less the gist of who we are and what's going on within the first 30 seconds of a show. But within that gist, we have a long time to bring texture to everything. And that's the fun of that show for me, is we bring the texture to it, you know?
Is there a form or?
No, start with a scene and then whatever. add people as we need to, or cut to things as we need to, or don't. But more or less, if we like these characters and they seem to have legs, just stay with them and see what happens. But that's the kind of thing where I will approach that show with a lot of openness. I'll bring as much care to when we're not talking as to when we're talking. But also, I'm very alert to what's my intention here. And it's not something I have to decide. It's usually something that I notice it. Oh, there it is. That's it. That's the reason why I'm talking to him right now, or that's what I'm trying to get him to do. Your intention in a scene almost always relates to what do I want the other person to do. It's rarely what do I want. It's what do I want them to do. I want them to feel welcome. I want them to shut up. I want them to give me a hug. I want them to feel sorry, whatever. As soon as you realize, oh, that's why I'm talking to you, I'm trying to get you to do that, that's it. So openness brings you to this sense of like, oh, this is what I'm acting on for the rest of the show. If I'm doing a Harold or montage, I'm not really going to play that way. I'm going to start off much more considerate about, okay, this is the joke that's at the center of this scene. But now once I decide on the joke, I'm not going to press it too hard. I'm going to retain a sense of openness for the whole rest of the scene to let whatever happens. But whatever happens, I'm going to find a way to tie it back to the central joke that I've already decided is my joke in this scene. So it starts with a little bit more deliberation, but it's still that same sense of like in my mind, there's no difference between slow and fast comedy. It's exactly the same thing.
I have the same opinion. I have the exact same opinion because people will say, oh, TJ and Dave, that's like slow, and AssCat, that's like real fast. But in all honesty, they're making choices every second.
Yes.
In both shows. And it's just the way it appears somehow. That it's just the illusion of certain things. And plus there's a lot of like running and editing.
There's a lot of editing. It moves faster.
Right.
It's more succinct.
Right.
And people will be making choices in AssCat to move to the next thing. Each choice moves forward to the next thing. Whereas in a TJ and Dave show, each choice moves deeper into the thing that's already here.
Yeah. And so you're not seeing someone whip across the stage to move to something else. You're seeing someone just live life in TJ and Dave.
Yeah. So what you see with students a lot is people will imitate the fast shows, and everything will just be, there's no openness.
Right.
There's no breathing room to let anything actually sink in. They just feel like they have to populate it with lots of ideas. Or you'll see them do slow shows where it's very open, but they're not making any choices. Right. It's just a lot of blank, weird, dead pauses. And then usually what happens is things get very dramatic because you feel this weight in the scene and you don't know what to do with it. So then every single scene becomes a divorce scene or whatever.
Yeah, mom died, so you just have to move on, Dad.
Yeah, and that's an artificial heaviness that comes out of, I just didn't make any choices that are fun.
Right.
And I have all this open space suddenly. And then people will blame like, well, slow comedy isn't fun or fast comedy is too fast. And it's really not. It's not, like you got to find your balance.
Well, there it is.
We built nothing.
No, I feel like talking out openness that way is the thing.
Yeah. Okay, I'll accept it. I thought we were going to talk about like how to schedule a team meeting or something. We could do that. I don't want to talk about that.
Well, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Ow! There it is!
Well, I certainly enjoyed myself in that conversation, as I'm sure you can tell. Louis Kornfeld, folks, one of my favorite improvisers, teachers, and people. Really great guy. And if you are in New York City and want to check him out and perform, if you've never seen him perform, you've got to. On Kornfeld and Andrews, they perform every Sunday night at the Magnet Theater. I believe he is still out of town this Sunday, though, so you will have to check him out another Sunday. Find out more information on magnettheater.com. Maybe you can even take a class with him. Again, all information on magnettheater.com. Well, that's this week's episode. Next week's episode is with a really great comedian. It's someone who has been through the Magnet Theater, but she's not currently there. She's doing other amazing things in her life. Jenny Ann Hochberg, she is next week. You want to check that one out. And hey, let me just make the announcement. 2 weeks from today, I said that there's a big name in improv coming up, and it is 2 weeks from today. the man himself, Armando Diaz, is going to be on the There It Is podcast. Heck yeah, I can't wait to share that one with you. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.